I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London for Al Mayadeen television, talking about Saudi Arabia, talking about the existential crisis that now faces that kingdom. I know from conversations with people that I listen to all the time in the Arab world that because such things as happened to Jamal Khashoggi happen on a big scale almost every day. In Syria, for example, people are brutally hacked to death on a daily basis in significant numbers, that there's an underestimation amongst the Arabs of the powerful impact that recent events have had on the political and reputational position of Saudi Arabia in Western countries. You'll have to forgive them their hypocrisy. The Western public opinion and those who lead it, guide it, manipulate it, were quite unmoved by busfuls of Yemeni schoolchildren being dismembered, not with a chainsaw, sure, but with weapons sold to the Saudi Arabian Air Force by us. You'll have to forgive them their double standards. They didn't want to look and cared not, even if they did, at the hundreds of thousands of casualties in Syria caused by Saudi Arabia and one or two of its allies. You'll have to forgive them their double standards when opposition teenagers, even women, were threatened with or actually were beheaded in public in Saudi Arabia. That didn't move them. But touch a hair on the head of a Washington Post insider, someone from inside the Beltway who knew every congressman, every senator, on friendly terms with every columnist, correspondent, and editor, touch one hair on his head and the sky falls in. Double standards, yes. Hypocrisy, yes. But nobody should underestimate the gravity of this current situation. I'm here to tell you from London that if any British politician were now to step forward and say, for example, we have to go to war with Iran to side with our allies, Saudi Arabia, the public would laugh them off the stage. The idea that there's going to be business as usual between Western countries and the current Saudi Arabian regime is utterly ridiculous. Everywhere, on every phone-in program, every reader's letters column, every newspaper office, every radio station, every TV station, suddenly everyone is questioning. And questioning why they never questioned before our unholy relationship to the House of Al Saud. This is of enormous significance. It changes the paradigm between British and Arab and other international players with regard to Saudi Arabia. And that will have its effect. It will have its effect on Western policy towards Syria. It will have its effect on Western policy towards the war in Yemen. It will have an effect on Western policy towards the negation of liberty, freedom, democracy in Saudi Arabia. It will never be glad, confident morning again for the House of Saud and its former hirelings in some cases. One of the most extraordinary things about the last week or two has been Where did all that money that Saudi Arabia spent on public relations go? Where are all these journalists they bought? What was the use of all these television stations and newspapers which they purchased and controlled so ruthlessly? Their public relations position has been swept away in a deluge, now of derision. The latest Saudi story, that their first statement was a lie, that Khashoggi walked out of the consulate in Istanbul unmolested within half an hour of having arrived there, is now officially a lie. Their second story, that something went wrong in an interrogation and the interrogee unfortunately passed away, is also now officially a lie. Now we're asked to believe that some of the most powerful aides of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia traveled as tourists for one day on government chartered aeroplanes to Turkey and brought a nice little bag with a chainsaw in it, happened to get into a fight in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, in the course of which Jamal Khashoggi unfortunately died. A fight. Khashoggi, a 60-year-old journalist, got into a fight with 18 Saudi men, many of them trained professional killers, one of whom had a chainsaw, as you do when you're coming for a day trip to Istanbul.
Picnic in Istanbul.
Donald Trump says he finds that explanation credible. Well, he probably does, actually. But only Donald Trump finds it credible. No, the government of the UAE broadcast that they too find it credible. Surprise. But nobody else finds it credible. It is now impossible for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to travel to the United States or any European country. He'd be arrested. A judge would give a warrant for his arrest in connection with the murder of a prominent Saudi journalist working inside the Beltway, inside the United States. And so, it's only my view, the line of Salman has finished. The king is too old and too poorly, too sick to resume control. The crown prince is finished, kaput, a dead parrot. Finished. So something big will now have to happen in Saudi Arabia, and we'll be examining on this show what that something might be. One thing's for sure, Saudi Arabia's political power in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, in the Western world, is flowing at quite a rate of knots down the drain. Saudi Arabia will be weaker at the end of this. Iran will therefore be stronger at the end of this. The government in Syria will be stronger. Those fighting Saudi aggression in Yemen will be stronger because Saudi Arabia and its erstwhile Western allies are now weaker. Donald Trump is now much weaker, which I predicted on day one, by the way. Turkey. Well, you don't need to love Khashoggi, by the way, to take this view. I very far from loved him. You don't have to love Erdogan and Turkey, and I very far from loved them, to support Erdogan's insistence that committing such a crime in his country, to his guest, to his comrade in the Muslim Brotherhood, cannot possibly be allowed to go unanswered. So Turkey, so the Yemenis, so the Syrians, so the opposition voices in Saudi Arabia are all stronger. But the thing I predicted that everyone else missed in the beginning was the deeply personal relationship between Trump and Kushner, his son-in-law, and MBS. I'm not going to go into all the details on air, on television, but let's just say that Donald Trump is into the pockets of MBS for hundreds of millions of dollars. That's why he finds MBS's story about a fight credible. The problem is, therefore, that Trump just multiplied the deep political trouble he is in inside the United States. And I knew that that would happen because the Democrats, the liberals, their allies in the mass media in the United States, in the political class in the United States, in the deep state in the United States, is just looking for issues to kill Donald Trump with. And this was an issue they could not possibly have imagined would come their way. My last point is this. What does it tell us about the caliber of certain Arab rulers that they imagine that they could commit this crime and get away with it? The decision by Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait was an act of madness. And look what happened as a result. I believe in geostrategic terms, the murder most foul of Jamal Khashoggi, a single journalist in Istanbul, will be as important geopolitically in the medium term as the disaster of the invasion of Kuwait. I'm just an enthusiastic amateur. We are joined here tonight by distinguished experts too. And so, who's going to respond first? Dr. Papadopoulos, welcome back.
Thank you, George. My name is Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, and I'm the editor of Politics First magazine. I think, first of all, I should say that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi really demonstrates once again the rancid and barbaric nature of the Saudi authorities. And it really does beg a belief that any country in the world has relations with this country. But alas, money and also oil makes the world go round. And that is a very sad reality. Two questions that I have, which I would pose to the Saudis, are these. Number one, why did the Saudis first of all say that Khashoggi hadn't been killed? Secondly, would Riyadh agree to a UN-appointed pathologist team to carry out a post-mortem on the body of Khashoggi? No one knows where the body is, but nonetheless...
He got into a fight and his body disappeared.
And that is, but the body has to be somewhere. It has to be somewhere. So would they agree with a UN-appointed pathologist team to carry out a post-mortem? If they don't have anything to hide, then they would agree to that. Now, there is obviously going to be some sort of response from Washington and London. After all, Britain and America do project themselves in the world as being the guardians of human rights, the guardians of press freedom. So they have to be seen as doing something. However, any action that the Americans and the British take against Riyadh will be discussed privately with the Saudis and will be agreed upon privately with the Saudis, and that is very, very important to recognise. Now,
what do you think that action will be, Doctor?
I don't believe there will be sanctions of any sort whatsoever. It is inconceivable for the Americans and the British to place sanctions on Saudi Arabia, like it's inconceivable for the Americans to place sanctions on Israel. Saudi Arabia and Israel are absolutely crucial for the West, because without those two countries, how would the West be dominant in the Middle East? So then that takes me on to my final point. And I hear every word that you say, George, about the potential ramifications of this. But I personally don't believe there will be any fundamental effect or alteration of this affair in terms of the relations between the West and Saudi Arabia. I think that because Saudi Arabia is, like Israel, absolutely crucial for the Americans and the British. They are not going to take any action whatsoever that's going to jeopardize their ties with Saudi Arabia, because if you jeopardize your ties with Saudi Arabia, then you jeopardize your hold over the Middle East. No different to how when I was on this program before and we spoke about Turkey, I said that no matter what Erdogan says in public, in private, he's saying very different things to the Americans. It's not in the interests for Turkey to jeopardize its relationship with America and vice versa. And it's not in the interest for the Saudis to jeopardize their relationship with the West and vice versa.
Although they just have.
They have, but let's be honest about it. They can play it out. They can take some sort of action. They could expel diplomats, but I don't think anyone should be under the illusion that this is going to break relations between the West and Saudi Arabia. It's just too crucial for that.
Okay, I understand the force of that argument. I take a contrary view. Let's hear from more of the experts. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Dr. Haider, I'm an economist. I have two issues. First is the cover-up by the Americans, and I think they started the procedure of finding an exit for the royal family. The second issue is the future of Saudi Arabia. The first issue is, I think, in the moment Trump announced that he had a telephone contact with the King Salman. And he said the king denied, and this is really a big accusation. And this is really the inflecting point in the whole issue. And then the next day he sent his Secretary of State, and surely he had a plan with him. No one sent his. This is one of the highest or prominent, let's say, politician in the world. Why he has to go to Saudi Arabia for the sake of a little crime? And it didn't happen according to their story. So I think from that point, we know that the Americans are trying to cover up, and this is a window opportunity for Trump to milk this cow furthermore. And then now we came, and then the second level, he said, this might have been committed by a rogue team or whoever it is, under parentheses, and then suddenly, yes, it was killed there. And now we have to believe that story. So I think this is the moment Trump is doing that, it means he is protecting the royal Saudi family, and they become untouchable.
Well, look, that's all true, but it's not the whole truth. Donald Trump's power is fading. It's fading fast. And he has got now every single journalist in America, including people like Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, who, I don't know if MBS was paying him, I can't say that, but he didn't need to pay him in that case.
That's true.
Because Friedman was and the New York Times and the Washington Post were the public relations department of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And they are now on television looking like they're in the middle of a nervous breakdown, simply unable to explain why they said this then and what they are now saying today. Ditto in the English Guardian, for example. Journalists like Jonathan Freedland, a very powerful man in the Guardian, who could not for love nor money be encouraged to take an interest in the war in Yemen, now has the war in Yemen as his #1 concern in the world. I'm arguing a sea change has taken place. Dr. Marcus makes the point that it may be cosmetic. It may not go all the way. I personally think it will. No continuation of MBS in power is now possible in my view. What about you?
I think there are many scenarios at the moment. I mean, with this level of support from United States officials, I would say this will continue for a while, unless something happens from inside the family in Saudi Arabia and can be really reliable and be trusted by other leaders of the world, then they will say, okay, the change is necessary now. But the trend of Mohammed bin Salman, from the point, I mean, from when he hijacked, I would say, arrested or abducted,
he came to power in a coup.
Abducted the Lebanese prime minister for 10, 15 days, and nobody, and he was unaccountable for that. And this was a crime.
Sure.
I mean, if it hasn't been for the Lebanese to be wise enough to hold the whole country together and give support to the prime minister, we would have a civil war in Beirut after that.
But you are familiar with the old story of the last straw which broke the camel's back.
Probably.
If you knew what was the last straw, you wouldn't put it on the camel's back.
Okay, can I mention one thing as well? I think it is very unwise for the dog, for the shepherd to shoot his dog, and I think now the Saudis started shooting their dogs, and the wolf, which is tramp, will have a nice meal after that.
That's a very colourful metaphor to
Can I mention the economic
No,
level
alas,
for that?
because that's the end of this segment, but we'll be right back.
Yeah.
You're watching Kalima Horra with me, Gord Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, talking about Saudi Arabia and the extraordinary tsunami of ramifications which are now rolling out, particularly in Western countries. Charles Shoebridge, you're a military man, an intelligence man, a lawyer. What's your take on, first of all, how Saudi Arabia could have imagined that they'd get away with this? Did they just fatally underestimate the importance of killing a Washington Post columnist that knows everybody in Washington, D.C.?
Hello, George, first of all. I think what's happened here is consistent with a train, if you like, of decisions that have amounted to poor judgment at the top of the Saudi authorities. And of course, at the top of the Saudi authorities, we're talking about the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. If we look up the decisions that he's made in respect of Yemen, in respect of his internal repression, in respect of alienating himself from quite a substantial part of people who still retain quite a lot of power internally in Saudi Arabia, creating an enemy in the wings waiting for him. Absolutely. And the extended elite in Saudi Arabia too. He has made rash decision after rash decision that may be a reflection of his inexperience. It may also be a reflection of the arrogance that says that he can get away with whatever he likes. Now, that decision, whoever made the decision, and of course we all suspect that this decision about Khashoggi was made by the Crown Prince himself, but if it was, this would be consistent with this line of poor judgments that this person has shown. But of course, he has also, I think, now trying to take advantage of the situation he has created. After all, we have seen people who may be considered rivals to him, chiefs of intelligence and so on, actually now under arrest and dismissed from their positions. He has taken personal control of the intelligence authorities. And so far from what might have been advised to avoid the situation you've, I think, correctly described earlier, taking a back seat, perhaps letting King Salman himself step more into the limelight. No, on the contrary, as with all or so many dictators going back in history, he has seen this as an opportunity to even further reinforce his own power. That is going to pose problems for the West, because what you've described, I think, is accurate. We can go back to what Dr. Marcus and yourself have said there, opposite positions, but coming from the same angle, if you like, that this is an important development. But the question is, how significant in the long term is this going to be? Because, of course, there is behind the scenes an intense crisis management operation going on here. And that operation is going on in London. in Washington, and also not just in Riyadh, of course, but also, of course, I suspect in Ankara as well. In Turkey, that because they want to manage this situation, but at the same time, in Turkey, for example, wants to milk it for all it's worth. And this is why, for example, in Turkey, we have seen not the government and the authorities officially releasing evidence. What they have done is hinted at it, they've put it into the media, but they haven't released, for example, at the current time, audio and video. This suggests to me, and I think many others, that behind the scenes there is a high-level negotiation going on between the Saudis and the Turks. We know, of course, these are regional rivals, but they need to coexist together. And I suspect that what's going on is that Turkey wants to keep some kind of relationship going with Saudi Arabia, but it wants to as well extract as many concessions, perhaps financial concessions, as it can for the future. And this is why we're seeing every time the Saudis backpedal on something or refuse to budge in what they're admitting happened, so the Turks drip feed a little bit more into the situation. And of course, if the Turks straight away had come out and said, look, here's the video, here's the audio, they would lose that negotiation leverage. And so I think they themselves are playing a game. In Washington, in London, there are powers, probably the dominant, overwhelming powers, that want to keep the relationship with Saudi Arabia going. Now, I suspect that what was intended behind the scenes was that the Crown Prince would have to take a back seat, that his days are over, that his position is untenable, and it could have been said quietly to him or to King Salman, you need somebody to step in, let it all blow over, and in a couple of years he can come back. I still think that may happen, but the actions of MBS himself in absolutely cementing and reinforcing his own power base and then blaming other people is going to make that very difficult for his friends in the West, including Trump, to justify the business as usual approach. But nonetheless, there is still that extraordinarily powerful lobby that is saying we need to somehow manage this crisis. We need our relationship with Saudi Arabia because of the Iran situation, because of oil, because of arms exports and many other reasons. And you are finding behind the scenes, I think, people feverishly working to minimize this as best they can. You mentioned, I'll just mention quickly about the media aspect. It's been extraordinary to see the 180-degree turn that our media in the West has undertaken in respect of this. They were completely fine with the massacres in Yemen, with internal repression, as you mentioned, with even children being locked up and sentenced to crucifixion and beheading. But then this person comes along and they've crossed a line. But in many ways as well, you can see that as a symptom rather than a cause of perhaps MBS's future. And by that I mean that it's interesting that the mainstream media in the US and the UK almost invariably follow the lead from what the foreign policy of the US and the UK is. And now you've got a position where all of the media who have turned a blind eye to all of these actions and incidentally have supported the Saudi agenda unquestioningly in Syria, for example, that they now are attacking MBS. And that suggests to me that actually they have, if you like, been let off the leash by knowing that UK and US foreign policy also behind the scenes has been pushing to push MBS to one side so that normal relations can resume. It looks like that's not working because he's refusing to go at the moment. And now, of course, they're going to have to grasp onto this very tenuous nettle, if you like, of, oh, actually, these were rogue elements, and now we've arrested and will prosecute these individuals. And, of course, they never will prosecute them openly or extradite them to Turkey or anything like that, of course, because there's always going to be the fear that they will actually, these people under arrest at the moment, they will spill the beans, they will release actually who gave the orders. And that, of course, is the last thing that the Saudi royal family wants.
Of course, I respect and understand the wisdom of your analysis, but speaking as, if you like, a practicing politician for many decades, I insist to you that no British politician of any party can now have anything to do with these individuals. That's how far I think public opinion has moved. You know that rats abandon a sinking ship. When the British Trade Secretary Liam Fox, who's a rather important rat, jumped off the ship, refused to go to the Davos in the desert, when the US Treasury Secretary pulled out, when these moguls of capitalism that have to be mindful of public opinion, like the head of Facebook, for example, the head of Google. You can get a corporate revolt, you could get a popular revolt against even the mightiest corporation that can cost them very dearly indeed. They read that. They sniffed that in the wind. That's why they pulled out. MBS could not make a state visit to any country in the West right now. There would be mass demonstrations. There would be a wall of media hostility. There would be legal actions. I would myself mount one. I would go to the court and demand a warrant be issued to seize MBS on suspicion of involvement in this ghastly crime. And for the first time in my life, all the media would be on my side. That's how much I think things have changed. We'll come back to you in a minute. We took our camera out onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. I've not seen these videos, but I'll be surprised if the public are not up in arms. Let's have a look.
Do you think that the Trump administration should impose strong penalties on Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think the Trump administration should take a serious look at the way that it has provided a social license for, justifying and promoting violence against journalists itself. I think some of the constant attacks that Donald Trump has had on journalists and journalism as a unit as a whole has created an environment where, he describes journalists as the enemy of the people.
I think it requires some type of international jurisdiction. Maybe I don't think it would be elevated to something like The Hague where you would have the UN, but I think it has to be somebody other than the United States. I think you need that autonomy. I think they have skin in the game because it was an American reporter, but I don't think that's the only piece of the pie that has to be looked at.
They still need Saudi Arabia's oil and stuff. So like at the moment, we'd need a lot of petrol because we're not green enough to kind of step away from the petrol stuff. So I think even if they give sanctions, they're going to be very cosmetic, I would say. Yeah.
Do you think that Trump's rhetoric about various news organizations and calling them fake news has attributed to this attack on journalism by Saudi Arabia?
I think the word, it's almost like I think it hasn't contributed in the sense that it might have directly acted on Saudi interests, but I think it provided a social environment where people could get away with it. And I think in that sense that it has contributed to it.
I think possibly could have influenced,
His lack of respect for journalism has put a really dark cloud on what we trust.
Interesting, and more of that later. Professor Mohammed Al-Masari, you are a Saudi, you are an opposition, a dissident Saudi. Don't accept any invitation to the consulate is my advice to you. Already. How damaged is the Saudi system by what's happened in the last couple of weeks, do you think?
Beyond repair, but let me just mention certain facts which are not known in the public. I was the first, the Thursday after the disappearance of Khashoggi, maybe you have been also mentioned in the Twitter, who mentioned that Khashoggi is dead and pray for his soul. And nobody else said that at that time. Later on, the Turks came and so on. But I have also other information. This information came from the highest ranks in Saudi Arabia, from someone who could listen sometimes to the telephone conversation of MBS with Dahlan, the Palestinian criminal living in the UAE. And he leaked some of the information to us. That's number one. Number two, I have also a good connection to the highest ranking in Turkey. The initial video, which was intercepted the same day, a copy of that has been sent almost the same day to Trump. So all what he's saying after that, he is lying. And they take the responsibility for my statement. It will come out. And the last statement, consider his last statement, say Turkey and Saudi Arabia have good relations. He is sending a signal that if you uncover me, my collusion, because he's in collusion, because he is receiving daily intelligence briefing on his table since late 2017, in which the CIA and the FBI already pointed that Khashoggi, there's a plot to kill or abduct Khashoggi, with some American entities which have been stopped. He never warned Khashoggi. The Saudis did the same plot for us, for me and Dr. Sa'al Faqih 24 years ago, and the British told them, don't even think about that. And they stopped them in their tracks. So this is an old behavior of the Saudis, only that they are now more reckless. That's it. So from these 2 points, Turkey wanted mostly to put Trump on the spot and lift the sanctions, lift the pressure on the lira, and gain on that. Gaining from making Saudi Arabia will be done otherwise. Concerning the body, yes, we have to have a corpus delicti, but in this case, we don't need, essentially, because both sides agree that the man was killed. So nobody is denying that he's killed. The Saudis have admitted, but he's dead, and nobody is disputing his death. And there's also a story from high up in the Saudi ranks that MBS insists that his head should be cut and delivered to him so he can enjoy his revenge. Anyway, whatever it is, what we should point is that Trump is involved and colluding, possibly even more actively than what I said, just as ignoring through Kushner. The plan was actually quite good. There was also backup plans. For example, one backup plan is that a person who said Khashoggi will depart Turkey, go to Lebanon, get apprehended as a big fraud, international fraudster, and handed to Saudi Arabia. And already the Saudi Interpol announced that. But they did not pursue the story because everything went wrong. The only reason the story went wrong is that the fiancée or the wife of Khashoggi, the Turkish wife, phoned her uncle, who is an advisor to Erdogan, and immediately the Turkish police surrounded the place and everything went bad. So for taking all these facts, I know they are facts, they will come to daylight soon, not sooner than later. Trump is in trouble, and all these Western campaigner, the Western government here who are opposed to Trump, who has placed sanction on them, and not sanction, but taxes and etc., they are happy to slaughter him. But it cannot be done immediately. It has to be done in portion, step by step. Now, step by step, are people approaching him slightly, portion by portion. One of the reasons of that is that the other sides also, they have the blood on their shirts and they're afraid that the Trump camp will expose them. So they do it in a measured way, sufficient maybe to influence the elections. After the elections, the swords will be taken out. Concerning Saudi Arabia, it's beyond repair. Now, MBS may, as reckless as he is and brutal, he's a very brutal.
I'll come back to
and
you.
And Ahmed bin Abdulaziz here adopted by the British government.
We'll come back to that.
And Mohammed bin Naif is the darling of the deep state of America.
Now you're talking.
Yeah.
We'll be back right after this. This is Kalima Horra. I'm George Delaware. This is Al Mayadeen Television. Before the break, we were talking to the Saudi dissident opposition leader, Dr. Mohammed Al-Masri. He left us at the break with the tantalizing possibility that rather than take a step backwards, MBS might take a step forwards and actually, by one means or another, assume the kingship itself. Kindly explore that.
Yeah, this one possibility, because he will not be shifted aside. He will not accept, even for the sake of his brother Khalid. Now, Khalid will be not acceptable because Khalid is also in collusion. He's the one who sent Khashoggi to Istanbul, because Khashoggi approached him and he gave him a nice face, etc. And we love you. And
did he give him assurances of his security?
But since the prospective wife or fiancée or whatever she is Turkish, it has to be done in the consulate. And that's since late last year. So this is in process, ongoing. So the man is implicated. That's the reason they rushed back to Saudi Arabia. The other forces, the oligarchy, you recall, the British Empire, they would like to have Ahmed bin Abdulaziz. The deep state already had his cards on Mohammed bin Naif. So they will try to put that forward, but Mohammed bin Salman will not accept that. He will not go without a fight. This is the highest.
Will he actually fight? Is there a possibility of actual armed conflict inside the Saudi elite?
This is the only entities which can fight in Saudi Arabia, the royals and their cronies and their tails and their chained dogs, if you use the old communist expression. There's the only one there. And the army is essentially ineffective, abandoned in Yemen, defeated by the Houthi.
Let me, just before we go to more Vox Pops, let me ask you this. Khashoggi was not, in fact, a member of the Saudi opposition.
Yeah.
He supported them in Syria. He even supported them in Yemen until very, very recently. He supported them in Afghanistan. He was there. He was with the jihad, with bin Laden in Afghanistan. Why would they do such a thing?
It seems to me he's very close to the intelligence. He was also the media advisor or journalistic advisor for Turki al-Faisal. And Turki al-Faisal is
former ambassador in London, former
head of the Saudi intelligence, and he was appointed ambassador in London and America just to cover up and to make him diplomatically immune from being snatched away because of September 11, because he's involved in September 11, indirectly or directly, the complicated way, BCC, etc., all this mess. So he's aware about many of these things, and he's involved in it. He is critical of the regime in the sense like someone who wants to have reforms. Maybe he's quite sincere. Only God knows. We don't know what's in the heart of the people. We could say he is, to borrow the expression of one Islamist in London, he's a chocolate opposition, a sweet and tasty opposition. But,
chocolate opposition.
Yeah, chocolate opposition. But he's definitely involved with one of the wings, and definitely believes in reforming the regime from inside, and he has his memoirs. I have laid my hand on 5 pages of these memoirs. They are full for expositions and scandals and crimes, which will, the 5 pages alone, shocking. So the whole memoirs, which seems to be printed, are in his memory stick, which may be already in Riyadh. They will be damning. And he was not publishing it yet anytime soon. Even an interview with the New York Times, with the Washington Post, was not published, or by the New York Times, I think. It was mentioned today and publicized that they didn't publicize it in his lifetime because of it could be endangering him. So he is really a treasure of information and connections and contacts. So that's maybe one motivation.
Let's go to the Vox Pops, because I want to hear more of what the British public had to say.
A lot of people have proposed that one way to put pressure on Saudi Arabia is to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, that will cost countries like Britain and America a lot of jobs. Do you think that's a cost worth paying for the end of a humanitarian crisis?
Absolutely. I mean, this isn't, who should get paid for making weapons that kill people? It's a commodification of death and violence.
And it's atrocious how, we're making money off of these guns, but ultimately if they're killing people, that's a problem. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that, having a ban on those type of guns, period, would definitely benefit. I don't care if it's, if it puts people out of business. They'll find somewhere else to do. They'll find something else to, do or a job to work in. There's plenty of things that people can do outside of selling guns that can make you money.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Because, in my opinion, guns should not really be legal, and people shouldn't really be selling them over. I think I know it's a big business behind it, but I don't agree with it, because a gun is obviously made to kill. So obviously it's not the gun that kills, it's the person who holds the gun. But still, I don't think guns should be needed, to be honest.
I think fundamentally you need to stop that arms production. You need to reduce it, and you need to look at alternative ways to create economic viability and vibrancy within a country and within a nation.
From the economical point of view, I don't think they're going to do much. They're still going to carry on selling arms because the war is very good business. But at the same time, like many companies do, they kind of destroy. I don't know. I'm just saying, for oil companies, for example, they go to Africa to destroy country, but then they set up a charity there. They sort of like. So I think it's somewhat similar to that. Yeah.
Well, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, put a motion to Parliament earlier this year to halt British arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Even more than 100 of his own members of Parliament refused to support it. If he tabled it on Monday, it would pass the House of Commons, because with a general election potentially in the offing in Britain, no politician could be seen to vote for continuing to arm the Saudi regime. That's how much I think things have changed. Haidar, what do you think of what Professor Masri said?
In connection with Dr. Masari's, it's a personal view and a personal experience. In the early 90s, I was working as a business writer for Al Hayat newspaper. And then after the newspaper been acquired by Prince Sultan from the Lebanese Kamel Mroueh, son, sorry, and then it became a Saudi-influenced newspaper. They created a magazine called Al-Wasat, and Jamal was writing for that Al-Wasat. And surprisingly, Jamal, he had like a very in-depth information from Afghanistan. Not even intelligent officer can acquire such information. His reports are really full of data, full of information, surprising. Meeting with the high ranks, people from Al-Qaeda, Rabbani, Hikmatyar, Rasul Sayyaf, Azzam, all these prominent members of the leaders of Al-Qaeda known later, even Bin Laden. His role was very important. He is a treasure of information and intelligent information. And it's not surprisingly, if you see Jamal Khashoggi among the mission went to the White House to meet President Reagan. He was among the members of Al-Qaeda. He went over there. If you remember that, he was one of them. And that's
not Al-Qaeda, the Mujahideen.
The Mujahideen. I mean, the Mujahideen turns to be Al-Qaeda later. I mean, some of them, but Al-Mujahideen officially, then they became the Arab Afghan, and he was one of them. And he was one of the fighters as well. You can see a lot of photograph for him carrying an RPG or Kalashnikov or with other fighters. Anyway, this side of Jamal Khashoggi is not to criticize him, but this is a fact, part of his life. And then as he continued, or because Al-Qaeda, that line finished, but we are not surprised that he might be a real treasure of information. And maybe they don't want this to be explored, especially even the United States. He may uncover anything. But at the end, will really solve the problem, or we find the truth? That's a big difference. Find the truth and justice as well.
Gentleman in the middle.
Thank you, George. My name is Sahal Ali. I'm a political and social commentator on affairs of East Africa and the Middle East. First of all, I'd like to thank those who made explanations on what happened. The reality is that you have got two versions: an account of a story by the Turkeys, where the murder took place, an account of a story by the Saudis, who are accused of being behind the killing. Initial information from Saudi Arabia is the one that has brought the biggest reputational damage to the kingdom and to their allies. The lies they made that the gentleman came into the consulate and left freely, and after 2 weeks period, they now telling that he has died in a fight inside the consulate. So another step taken is that the deputy intelligence, head of intelligence, Ahmed al-Asiri, and I think an important man who is the spokesman for the kingdom about the war in Yemen, who always describes as just a right action and correction of, a fight against the dangerous elements when it is a humanitarian catastrophe. Gentleman Saud al-Qahtani. These two were removed immediately and 18 people arrested. So the question everybody on this planet is asking, you denied the killing. Now you are trying to convince the world that I am removing these people and I wanted the attention to die down. That is impossible. As the lawyer said, the position of the Crown Prince is dangerously on the edge. His support comes from the young Saudis, and the young Saudis
gave their support because they believed he was a reformist who would change things around, modernize Saudi Arabia. And I think a reformist who murdered, whether directly or at his orders, a prominent critic, a gentleman who did nothing but who wrote against, is unbelievable. So what is happening here, and as we said at the beginning, these two Gulf-rich countries have for many years lived in paradise. They did not use their petrodollars. They have been trying to engage and involve in the affairs of other countries. Honestly, United Arab Emirates was creating total instability to all international efforts to stabilize our country, Somalia. You can see direct interventions, plots, and I think at the moment, what is questionable, the position of the West, where money is before morality. Look at the comments by the United States President Trump. He said, what happened is unacceptable, but Saudi Arabia is our ally. Why you bring an ally into the picture when what we are talking is about unlawful killing of human being? Where's the sympathy? Where is the words you expect from a leader of a big nation? The other thing, is when you look the statement made by the United Kingdom, the Foreign Office said it is a terrible act, and we wanted those behind the killing to be brought, to be held responsible. But in reality, there are noises we are hearing behind the scenes saying, we need Saudi Arabia more than Saudi Arabia needs us. And I think I have heard myself Trump speaking, saying that they asked the prospect of sanctioning Saudi Arabia if things are found to be the way the world is expecting. And he said, we are not going to sanction ourselves. And that means we have already made billions and billions of worth of arms deals with them. So if we sanction at this stage, we are only cutting our hands. So the world we live, the problem we have today, and I feel sorry, the Soviet Union let us down because we needed a balance of power, first of all.
Well, of course, I hear all these arguments, but I do think that many of you are underestimating the power of a woke public. The public is now woke on Saudi Arabia, and I believe that will change the natural predisposition of those in power to continue business as usual. The debate will continue right after this. This is the final segment of this important show on Saudi Arabia, so let me get through as many of our speakers as possible. Madame.
All this spotlight for a poor man who got so close to terrorists and, goodness knows how, and then happened to walk into an embassy.
He ended up dying the way that so many of his friends killed other people.
I'm surprised he even went close to the embassy in the first place, but there we go. And just a little reminder that Serena Shim, a Lebanese-American journalist, died almost to the day 4 years ago in Turkey, was murdered after reporting on the trade that ISIS... of ISIS weapons, etc., to and from Turkey and Syria. She died. No investigation was done. Not a word from the media. But this man is getting all this attention. I don't think we should let the UK off the hook here as well. It turns out that the British government have been using the RAF to train the Saudi Air Force for the past 4 years. Secretly, well, not so secretly anymore.
And doubled arms sales last year in just 1 year.
Well, that's in Theresa May's best interest because obviously her shares in BAE Systems and so on. So she's obviously that's profits for her. But you're training the Saudi Air Force. Similarly, they trained the Burmese army who were slaughtering the Rohingya Muslims. There's always got to be the British government in this. I'm surprised. I don't know. I don't tend to watch her too much, but we heard all about the Russians doing this and the Russians doing that, and that was all the big charade. So let's hear what she's got to say about the Saudis, killing the Saudis.
She hasn't said a single thing about it yet.
Well, she's probably got to, think, all this training of RAF. I mean, what's going to happen with that? We've got to ask the questions.
If the next British government will definitely stop it. I'm certain about that.
Just
I have to move on. I've got so many people.
The
UN
UN
here
just,
in front,
okay,
please.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sarah Mohammed. In my opinion, I think this why is it so important now, the killing this person. There is a lot of journalists who died before him. There is a lot of children, and every country, Yemen especially now, everyone was quite, okay, yeah, but now it's so important.
Well, whatever the reasons, it's happening.
Yes.
Do you welcome it or do you not welcome it?
No, because that is every life matters. Because when you kill, civilian or children is okay, but now when they kill someone important, yeah, everyone is talking about. Even the media before, everything they will pass. But I think they did it because they knew they get what the Western. It won't do anything. Otherwise, they wouldn't do the first place.
So you think MBS will remain in power? You think he should remain in power?
No, I don't think so. He will, but unfortunately, he's got allies and he's very important roles. So they will just try to keep, smooth everything. So they just try to, okay, it's a big deal, but same time, we will do something, but not important anyway. So.
Well, let's see. Adam Gary from Eurasia Futures. What's your take on all this?
Well, through all of this, there's one huge region and one disproportionately nuclear powerful country that no one in the wider media is talking about. First, let's talk about the wider Asian space, to which Saudi policymakers were looking long before people were talking about Jamal Khashoggi's death, indeed well before his murder was admitted. While a lot of famous people, from Richard Branson, isn't going to this Davos in the desert, I wish he would on a one-way ticket, but that's for another segment. Someone who I do respect very much is going, and that's Imran Khan, the newly elected Prime Minister of Pakistan, a country that is looking to avoid the draconian terms that the IMF would impose if they were to get a new loan, and is instead looking for cash injections from China, from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, possibly also from Qatar. So the Pakistanis who have already, the Saudis who have already invested $10 billion in Gwadar to build an oil refinery are looking at the eastern options. Crucially, the Russian president recently said about this issue and also to comment that as Khashoggi was a resident in the US, an exile from his home country, it's up to the US to have protected him, which is a very novel take on it. Russia and China's relations with Saudi Arabia have not been affected in any way by this, and I have no inclination to believe they will. Then there's the other country that hasn't said anything about this, and that is, of course, Israel, a country who is in many ways a closer ally de facto to the Saudi regime than even Egypt is to Israel, the first country in the Arab world to recognize the Israeli entity. Israel is very desirous to continue to build up an anti-Turkish alliance in the Eastern Mediterranean. In terms of petropolitics, it's already happening. Israel's working with Egypt, the Cypriot government, and the Hellenic Republic to build a gas pipeline from the Eastern Med into the heart of Europe. All of this is aimed at Turkey, a country where in years past, not that many years past, there was maybe kind of sort of going to be a Turco-Israeli deal. That's now dead in the water. Israel wants to preserve the Saudi, what little dignity is left of this regime, and they're dog whistling with their silence to the United States and to the Trump administration in particular to do as little as possible against MBS, although this may change because while Saudi isn't a democracy, they do have elections. There's the Republican Party, which stands for MBS, and there's the Democratic Party, which stands for Mohammed bin Nayef. So we'll see which faction of the Saudi family is elected in the American midterms.
Very, very interesting. Yes, gentleman there.
Hi, George. My name is Mustafa Aga. My opinion differ to yours. I do not think that this will cause the fall of MBS like many people are thinking now and what the media is trying to sell. I think I agree with Dr. Marcus here that basically this will eventually, in other words, get swiped under the carpet, because I think our government and the US government need MBS, need someone like that. I mean, if we take the example of Saddam Hussein, for example, he did go against the US at some point, but they were so patient with him until they decided to take him out. And MBS is on America's side, Israel's side, and everyone. So it's going to take a lot to take him out. And as one of the gentlemen mentioned, he doesn't want to step out or step back. So I think the only question I have here, as you were part of the political circle, is how do politicians sometimes change their opinion? Because all politicians, like you're saying now, they're all against him. And if you say anything, they all will stand against him. But then when this gets swiped under the carpet and they all start changing another 180 degrees,
well,
how
sometimes
does
that
normally
happens,
happen?
and sometimes it never goes away. But I'm bound to tell you, there is no member of parliament in this country who, if they received 5,000 letters and emails from their constituents demanding that they distance themselves from Saudi Arabia, who would ignore it. Because, as Dr. Johnson said, the knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. And MPs are metaphorically hanged every few years, increasingly few years, and they have to face election. And such is the sweep in public opinion, it's my argument, that no politician could now identify themselves with Saudi Arabia. Julian, in the middle row. Sorry I'm racing, but we're running out of time.
Thank you very much, George. Julian Morrow, amateur conspiracy theorist. And I was very interested to learn that Khashoggi was a first cousin of Dodi El-Fayed. What an unlucky family. And whenever Russia are accused of extrajudicial killings or assassinations, we always ask the question, cui bono, who benefits? And we look for some group that might want to make Russia look bad. Who benefits in this instance? Because as we've all gathered tonight, it's not Saudi Arabia, or even within Saudi Arabia, it's not MBS.
Very interesting. Gentleman in front of you. I'm not responding only because of lack of time. Sir.
Hello, George. My name is Dwali Yusuf. There's a question I want to ask the Americans and the Europeans. They always criticize to Iran and other Muslim world this immorality. Where is the morality of Americans and Europe for the death of Mr. Jamal? And who's going to get punished? I know Saudi will not get punished. This princess will get away with it. This is going to go for a few weeks or maybe a few months. So where are we going to head? The world is becoming immoral. When you look in Yemen, people are dying every day, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, they've suddenly woken up to that after several years.
So
of
that means what I mean is when it comes to third world, what they called, it doesn't matter if anybody dies, and this story will going to end.
Well, as I said, a busload of Yemeni children are not worth the hair on the head of a Washington Post columnist. Charles Shoebridge, what's your estimation of what the British government, which you know best, but other Western governments too, how will they get out of this? It is a jam. You'll at least agree with me on that. They're in a jam here.
I don't disagree with your fundamental analysis that this is an extremely important moment of crisis that has been caused, self-inflicted, by the Saudi royal family, MBS in particular. My only point is I think the jury is still out. It's still not clear the timelines that we're talking about, whether there's going to be a period of MBS staying out of the limelight, whether King Salman will come more further forward and will assist Britain and America and the other allies in the West to actually manage this in a way that it can eventually be business as usual. We still haven't seen that, but the signs at the moment are that MBS is reinforcing his position. And therefore, given that he has isolated or marginalized rivals and he's continuing to do that, it may be that the West would definitely prefer, I think, to be dealing with somebody who's not MBS because he's reckless and he's causing them problems. But whether somebody else exists in Saudi Arabia at the moment who can step into those shoes, I think is becoming ever more questionable. And so this has to be managed by the West. The other crucial question is, I also wanted to mention Israel, and there's an important point in this. I'll just leave it very quickly. We are talking about business relations between, particularly Trump, of course, and the US and Britain and others with Saudi Arabia. It said, oh, we can't possibly not have good relations with Saudi Arabia because of arms exports, oil imports. But you know what? If we wanted to, we could be having arms exports and oil imports to countries like Iran, countries like Russia. And so there's another factor here. And that factor has been identified by some in the media. And of course, that factor is Iran and Israel, because Saudi Arabia is crucial to the American strategy of Trump, but particularly some of his advisors and, of course, some of his officials who absolutely hate Iran and absolutely cannot afford to lose Saudi Arabia as an ally against Iran. And the reason you have to ask, why is it so important to marginalize always and have American policy so dominated by the confrontation with Iran? And you have to look at that word, Israel, and wonder what the influence there is and why American foreign policy is so, if you like, co-opted by Israel, even in this respect. Because after all, America could be having good relations with Iran. It could be, it's interesting to me that Saudi Arabia actually threatened, if America imposed sanctions on it as a result of Khashoggi, interestingly, Saudi Arabia threatened to have a rapprochement with Iran, a rapprochement with Hezbollah. And that tells you that actually, in some ways at least, it's actually Saudi Arabia that is doing America a favor by destabilizing so much of the Middle East, and that it's, of course, Saudi Arabia that seems to be admitting, when it said that just a week ago, that it is a willing tool of American foreign policy in dividing Sunni, Shia, and so on, and helping America and Israel in its dominating position in the Middle East. And so when we step back, there are very, very important, not just economic, but geopolitical considerations here that I suspect many people, not just in the States, but in the West, many people in power, totally irrespective of public opinion, which incidentally has been against Saudi Arabia for years in this country and in the United States. For example, just a month ago, an opinion poll found 70% of people, and this is before Khashoggi, 70% of British people opposed arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So public opinion, of course, is extremely strong at the moment, and the media is against Saudi Arabia for the current time. But money talks, but also so does that geopolitical position. And we have to wait and see.
But the media cannot change whilst MBS is still there. That's my point. They cannot say all that they've said and are saying, I mean, as we speak. They cannot do all that, say all that, and say, all right, he stayed in position, business as usual. There has to be some level of accountability because the tail cannot wag the dog in the end. The dog is us. Britain, the United States. The Saudis, however rich, however we enrich ourselves from them, they are the tail, not the dog.
I like to think you're right, and I hope you're right, and I think you may well be right. I'm not saying it's not the case, but I think it's, despite the certainty of the positions, I think it's too early to say because there are so many powerful influences behind the scenes trying to manage this to allow the relationship to continue. And unless somebody can step into MBS's shoes, then that relationship is going to have to be via MBS. And all the signs at the moment are that MBS is refusing to budge and refusing to do what his country's national interest, of course, demands, or his royal family's interest demands, which is to step back to allow that very profitable, mutually profitable relationship that they have with the West to continue. But let's think as well about the bigger picture, about Israel's role in this and about how this is going to pan out in the future, because this is all, if you like, an unnecessary crisis.
Haydar, last word to you, literally a minute, so kindly.
Yeah, two quick words. I think we have to watch for the future is what is the real economic and financial future of the Saudi Arabia, since they took the conflict and the confrontation to an international level. In the previous, before the Khashoggi, it was a regional conflict. Yes. Now it's an international confrontation, and I think they will pay a high price for that. And maybe the Devil's Desert will be one of the victims, as the near future victim. But we have to watch that. The second point is, if Erdogan did not really try to prove that the truth has to prevail, then his credibility is on the balance as well.
Well, that's right. With his own opposition, with his own party, the AKP, the ruling party in Turkey, is from the same political trend as Khashoggi. Turkey is a rival of Saudi Arabia, not a friend, however warm the words were from the king. Turkey wants what Saudi Arabia has. It wants the allegiance of Muslims around the world. The Turkish regime is a nationalist one, but it's also an Islamist one. And this is now a gigantic opportunity for Turkey to seize the allegiance, the affections, and ultimately the political support of many Muslims around the world. The Russian and Chinese shoes that didn't drop are undoubtedly that's significant. Russia and China has not become involved in this, and they have said it's an American, Saudi, and Turkish affair. But the public relations tsunami, I'm calling it, and I know about public relations. I've been on top of a wave against the Iraq war, for example. I've been on the receiving end of many, many waves. And I know that there are some things that it's impossible to come back from. And a Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino, blood-spattered movie in a consulate in Istanbul, when the victim is known to every member of the US Congress as a personal friend, there ain't no coming back from that, in my humble opinion. It's been a marvellous show. I'm glad that you joined us for it. I'm George Galloway, and from Kalima Horra, thank you very much indeed for watching.